So this is a little bit about how if I'm gonna make video games, how I'm gonna do that, and like what my values are and where I am in something like the world of game development. There's very hardcore pro AAA developers. There are people that are really into making money in the video game development world, and there's people that are really into like making very important and so like cinematic theater and very important products. And then there are people that are more indies and that don't want to get rich, perhaps, and it's more about telling a story or creating something low poly or even like retro. There are quite important retro game developers today, pixel art game developers, and so like where I fit into like the world of game development. So I've written something like a mission, a purpose, or something like a structure of what I see as something like a better career in the world of like video games. I think here. So, core purpose or statement of quality for like a Euro indie studios, for Euro indie studios to laws. So, my first thing to say is that graphics aren't that important, or that something like PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3 quality is good enough, and also difficult enough to make. Art isn't easy to make, and it's some crazy madness stuff, and ultimately it can make you, so quite sick, depending on how much you get into like the art world. And they're if you're not good with making art, and it sort of like messes with you, limiting that is like one of the first things you have to do, if you or you'll go something like insane from trying to make art. And that's the way it is. But for me, it's just sort of like important that this PlayStation 2 PlayStation 4 is like good enough for me. I thought that some PlayStation 2 video games were something like, even though they were quite retro, looked amazing, and with the right post-processing they look almost like cinematic, and even rather low resolution, and something like low poly video games have a certain charm to them. Even the old pixel art games from Lucas Art, and sort of like pixel art classic. I think a recent one is Celeste, and there's something called Octopath Traveler, which is quite pixelated, and there's quite a few graphics, even though they're quite pixelated and retro, that I think are good enough. So, and I also think that some of the best looking PlayStation 4 video games like almost look like movies, and there was no need to make them look better. PlayStation 5, that's something like Nanite from Unreal, ultra realistic ray tracing, photo, everything looks like a photo, crazy high resolution textures and effects and all that stuff. I feel like that's totally cool, and I really enjoy like playing that stuff, but I just don't want to make it myself. I think it's a bit excessive and perhaps stupid to put that much effort into something that's just something like it's supposed to be a video game, and the way you're supposed to enjoy the story and like what happens in the world and to the characters, if that's the kind of like story video games that I want to focus on. So that's like why I feel like PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 is perhaps the best, and then PlayStation 4, if I have an amazing story and then it doesn't need to look better, it's somehow redundant to make movies or video games look better than that, even if you could. It's my opinion, and sort of like my experience, that's sort of how it is, and that's sort of like my point of view. So after that, that's something that story is everything. It matters almost more than making money or to get famous from the work. That if I'm gonna work on something, it has to have a really good story, or I don't want to work on stuff. Perhaps other people feel differently, but to me it's like alpha omega, and I simply don't care, and I can't deal with stuff and make sense of why I'm even working on stuff and making art unless there's like a really good story and lore, and you would say an entire world or something like characters, good characters, bad characters, enemies, and something like destruction and stuff that goes wrong, and something like a quest for the main characters to embark on. And without that, I can't really make sense of like why even make art and so on. So that's very important to me. And then that I really like to work on like more passion projects, and yeah, why not? And somehow to like make a difference and like tell something like stories that resonate with people, and perhaps like make the audience think, or something like reflect on something like what they're doing, or how they could make the world a better place, or in a sense what's happening to them or what's happening around them, and why the world is the way it is. Stories can help people understand that. Then that I think theater or something like really good motion capture and drama, and really good dialogue, and in a sense movie scripts, and then some more like the stuff you see on like when people go to really expensive theater shows. is very, very important and something like worth trying to like capture. And it's that's very, very good art. And I think that if there was something that was really, really good art in all of this video game stuff, that I think is something like even if it hurts and it's very, very difficult to make this stuff, it's sort of like perhaps worth it anyway. Something like really, really good theater, and then that's really all, and the rest in video games is just sort of like effects and graphics, and I'm not sure how much it's worth, but and so on. And then last, that lore, that's something like you can like create this sort of like empty world, but I think that's something like, for instance, the Elder Scrolls video games, and there's like certain video games that get like much better when there's like lore. For instance, in Dead Space, you're something like walking around this all like space station, and there are these simple like remains or simple like data logs, and some are messages or like from the former crew, and sort of like what happened to them, where you somehow, for instance, you find some documents lying on the table, and then you like read them, and they provide a bit of like context. And if that lore is really, really good or like detailed and really helps you understand what's going on and something like enjoy the content more, then I think something like lore is very, very important. Sort of like if you like read a book, usually there's something that's like what happens right now and something like what's happening, and then it goes into some like description. For instance, like where are you, like what does the forest you're in something like look like right now, what does something like the town you look like, and then sort of like what's this and what's happening, and sort of like details and filler. And if you like just rip that out of most books, they'd not really be worth reading, and that's sort of like what lore is. And I feel like not just adding it for the sake of it doesn't make sense, but quality lore where you like it helps add to the atmosphere and the drama and then all the stuff that's going on in the video game is very, very cool when you can get that right. And for instance, you find some documents with blood on it, and then you like read it, and then you put it down, and a few seconds later you hear some screams, and you know, where somehow it's all been something like put together, and there's this sort of like quotation marks almost entertainment or better theater and effects around the lore that somehow makes it something like really worth reading. And when you're done, you feel like the world you have been in is so much more richer from it. And where the Dark Souls and video games with this sort of like weird Asian, something like, I don't know, but hokey lore that somehow goes into this almost like what happened hundreds of years ago in this sort of like world that you're walking around in, and why that's even important. And you find some item, and then you read about it, and just somebody created like 1,000 years ago in the past, and then what happened to them, and then you get that ring today, and so on. So there's like all this stuff where I think that lore, if it's really quality or quality lore, really adds to video games. That's somehow like the stuff that I want to work on. And then also that I like wrote down what my favorite video games ever are, and to like help me like what do I want to work on. And this isn't so much like what made money or what was popular and like what won all the awards this or that year. This is like what kind of like video games did I think, something like going back now, I guess like 35, 40 years, I'm 46 years old, something like what resonated the most with me and was the most fun or cool stuff ever. And not what won awards and what other people like, but just myself. And Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare, is simply my absolute favorite video game ever. And it's something like where you have this fixed camera, and then you watch something like the main character through cameras walk around in front of you. So you sort of like in the early Resident Evil video games, it was something like you had what was called tank controls, and you could sort of like walk around, and it was something like these sort of like the early survival horror video games that were like, I thought like really cool. But Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare was just amazing. And then the Dark Souls video games, and after that old card games and sort of like strategy stuff. And then also Baldur's Gate, the sort of like isometric role-playing video game masterpieces that I felt were like really cool. And last, teen horror. The best I can think of is what was it called? Until Dawn, which was this sort of like perhaps indie classic for PlayStation 4, I think, or PlayStation 3. That was totally amazing. And somehow teen horror and also like teen horror movies tend to be really cool. And like I say, I Know What You Did Last Summer and the Scream series, there's just something about these sort of like teen horror video games or movies that I think are really, really cool, and like some of like the most fun stuff like I ever watched on television that I really want to work on. So so this is something like where writing this down, I feel like something like what I want to do and what I don't want to do, and what my favorite stuff is from like all my life, not what was popular, made money, or like won awards, or like whatever I should think was the best video game, so that were like fun and good enough, but literally the best stuff ever I have played. So like very, very personal stuff, and even if it didn't make a ton of money and other people didn't like it, if it was like my favorite stuff ever, it's somehow like on this list. And I think that knowing these two things, like you said, that these things are like set in stone almost, and this is sort of like what I want to work on, and you could say these are my values, and it also has to do with you could say who I am, or what I want from my life, and what I think about art and the art world and making money and being an artist and all that stuff. That somehow this is important to know, and really helps me find my place, and so like make sense of like, if I'm gonna make video games, what are they gonna be and what quality are they gonna be, and what's sort of like so gonna be in them, and what are my limitations, and what do I not, or what don't I want to work on, and in a sense where don't I want to go, and how do I not want to make money even if I have a chance to do that, and all those things I think are like quite important to like make sense of, so you can like decide like what's best for you and what kind of game developer you want to be, and if the money is worth it, or what kind of like corporations or places or teams or game development or game jams you want to work on, and so on. That it somehow all adds up to rather important knowledge about yourself, and also something like what you think is like worth a dang, and what kind of video games you want to see more, something like you want to see more of that stuff, particular genres or tropes, and like ultimately what you want to add to the world, and why you even want to be an artist, and something like answering all those questions I think are like very important, and that I think that this somehow really helps me set like a rather tough direction for what I want to do, also what I have to practice and like learn and get better at. And finally, if it's gonna be rewarding or something like worth it to make video games for me, it will depend on me, something like not going too much against my values, and how and why even to make money from something like crazy entertainment or effects, and something like you could say made up bullshit, and all those questions, trying like resolving them sort of like boils down to like what's your favorite stuff, and sort of like what's your values, and how you even want to make money, and what do you want to add to the world, and what's really important to you, and what do you really like. And answering all these questions I think are really, really important for game developers, so you have more fun, but you also feel that it's like rewarding, or you're working on something that makes sense, or you actually want to finish, or you think it's something like worth all the struggles and so on, the problems in making video games. And that's sort of why I think it's nice and like cool to write down stuff like this. And right now I'm working on a video game called Lords of the Desolate, and I just want to see if I can like finish that, and that's sort of that, and that's it. Thank you. Bye.